So, for the next few weeks, our epistle reading will be from the book of James. This James was the brother of Jesus and the leader of the church in Jerusalem, which, despite the importance of its location in regards to Jesus' ministry, was, in the grand scheme of things, a rather poor and out-of-the-way community. They were so poor that Paul actually had to go around and collect money for them during his missions and have it sent back to support Jerusalem. But this letter from James was not written to a specific community like Paul's letters were. This was a universal letter meant for followers of Jesus who lived outside of Israel to read. And it was meant to be a guide for these early Christian communities, a guide on how they should live as a community, what kind of practices they should take up, and what kind of behaviors they should avoid, with the chief aim of the letter being on how to actually live out their faith. The central message of the letter as a whole can be found in verse 4 of chapter 4, where James says, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God." This is the central premise of the entire book of James, and it informs everything else he has written. He's telling his fellow Christians that a decisive choice must be made between being a friend of the world or a friend of God. So when we hear this call to make a choice now, the thing to keep in mind is that friendship in the Greco-Roman world was a much richer category than it is in our own contemporary language. When we talk about a friend, we typically mean someone we enjoy spending time with. But for James and his audience, to have friends meant to share in the same mind with them, to have the same outlook, the same view of reality. So to be friends of the world meant to have a particular outlook on reality, to share the view and values of the world. And by the world, he didn't mean a sort of neutral place where human activity is carried out, or even creation as a whole. The world, in this context, means a particular system, a logic about how things are to be done. What James is saying here in reference to the world is this vision of a zero-sum universe, a closed system with finite resources in it. And so if you want to be someone in the world, what you need is always more. After all, the important people in the world are those who are rich and powerful. And there is only one way to achieve more in this world, and that is to take it, to claim it for yourself. And inevitably, within this system, the more you claim for yourself, the less there is for anyone else. The less there is for your neighbor. The logic of such a world is always envy, rivalry, competition, and murder. You do whatever you've got to do to get ahead. The widows, the orphans, and the poor, those are just the losers in this world who must be left behind. Because to help them is to put yourself at a disadvantage. Remember, there's only so much pie to go around. To give any away is to risk becoming a loser yourself. So to be a friend of the world, James says, is to live according to this logic. To maximize one's share of limited resources, even if such accumulation means others must go without, even if it means others must die because of their lack. Now, in contrast, to be friends of God is to see with the vision of God, to share in God's wisdom, and to act according to God's logic. And in God's reality, the universe is not actually a zero-sum game of limited resources. Rather, it is an open system, ordered to a God who gives freely and openly to all of creation. It is to see this life as pure gift. That's how our reading from James opens this morning. Every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above. This is what it means to be a friend of God. To see the universe as a gift and to act like it is a gift. To give freely, just as God has given freely to you. To concern yourself with the lowly, with the widow and the orphan, with those who the world deems to be the losers. It is to join into the story of God, this story of a giver who gives so far in giving as to give his own Son for the benefit of all. A friend of God or a friend of the world. That is the choice that James is calling on us to make. And notice how they are mutually exclusive worldviews. If one of them is right, then the other is wrong. So to be a friend of God, to take on God's worldview and to enact it, will by necessity make you an enemy of the world. And so likewise, to be a friend of the world, to take on the world's view of reality and to act on it, will, of course, make you an enemy of God. Now, of course, everyone who James is addressing here wants to be a friend of God. But there is a risk, a danger that James wants to point out to his fellow Christian communities. And that danger is the gap between what we say we believe and how we act. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers, he says. To hear the word but not to act on it is to betray what you say you believe. Because if you see the universe as this open system in which all are showered with God's grace, why are you acting as if you live in a closed system? How can you receive freely from God only to tighten your fist in the face of the needs of your neighbor? Look, the book of James can be a harsh message. No one wants to be accused of hypocrisy, but it's an important message for us to hear. In a time when many look with suspicion at the church, because we have so often failed to be doers of the word. The gospel really does call on us to live differently from the world. But this hard message does not have to lead us to despair at our failure to live up to it. Because remember, if the universe really is all gift, all of the time, then even when we fail to live as friends of God, which we will inevitably do, we can get back up, dust ourselves off, and look again at this universe of grace all around us. We can remember that forgiveness, like all the other gifts of this life, is always available. And all we have to do is turn around and commit ourselves to being friends of God.